So if I'm out trekking, it is true that I very often, in the wintertime, will have a pretty good sized blade with me, and there's just a handful actually that I carry nowadays. I'm pretty stuck on a few brands. I'm loyal and I'm a little bit stubborn, and so I like my LTRites, I like my Bear Force knives, Reef knives. Those are kind of brands I've stuck with. There's a few others you'll see on my channel from time to time, but this blade is not perfect for everything. When it gets down to small detail work, actually using a bigger blade like this in the wintertime is just a bit risky if you're not careful. There's ways that you can choke up. I am very familiar with how to be a little bit more safe with this, but there's just a lot of edge exposed. So very often with smaller tasks, I'll put that one back in the sheath and I'll pull out my BFK. This new guy, the Stumpy, it's probably not new to me by now, but it might be new to some of you. This is a really versatile blade, a very helpful blade for out in the woods or just EDC tasks in general. And I have used it pretty hard. This is a hard piece of walnut. Yeah, even with a pretty hard piece of walnut, I'm not concerned about it. Actually, the Nitro V is pretty awesome stuff. When it comes to, this is not a board I would make a bow drill out of at all, but when it comes to a bow drill, if I were to flatten out a board and try to make something out of it, let me just do a demonstration of that real quick here. Very acute point, but that acute point is strong. It's not a weak point. I was a little concerned about it when I saw how acute it was. I was actually really interested in it because of that as well. I just didn't know if that's something I would manage to break in hard woods, but there's actually enough material behind the edge, or looking at the spine here, there is kind of a distal taper down. There's enough. And the sweep of the edge has been really cool for skinning projects. Like it's amazing. I'll run this thing through a squirrel or rabbit. It's like a zipper. Just opens them up, and there's not a lot there. So I can get pretty close with my finger. On the other side, it can do a lot of control. I found that just this angle in general, running up the edge, is so good for skinning, but I'll leave that aside. Just go to some more of this bushcrafty kind of thing. Just carve a notch into this. And no, it's not a Scandi. And yes, this wood is extremely hard. This is an old piece of walnut. It is not soft at all. Now, usually with woodworking, I'm going to grab a Scandi. I've got some pretty excellent Bear Force knife Scandis, like the simple knife. I've had a couple variations of that, and it is a preferred knife. It's a preference that I have with woodworking. Of course, I want to use a Scandi when I can. But a bow drill in general is actually a pretty simple task. It doesn't require as much skill to make the materials like the plank, the board. You don't have to have a Scandi to do something like that. I think that's a little bit oversold in media, that you have to have a Scandi to do that sort of task. Actually, I find that a flat grind, a saber grind, sword grind, I don't really care, convex, all of them will do simple tasks like this pretty well. It's just how fast do you need it to be done, how hard is the wood you're working with. If you're making a bow drill, you're probably not going to use the toughest wood you can find around. Okay, there's just a little example, and of course I would burn that in and work this over a little better. After twisting in it a few times, it would open up this divot some, but I wouldn't be using black walnut personally for this. Not saying nobody could, I don't really know how to use black walnut very efficiently for bow drills. I find it to have too high a moisture content most of the time. Seems to me that for whatever reason, a lot of people think that a small knife isn't that good at firecraft or feather sticks, and I actually think it's easier. It's more controllable. Maybe not necessarily easier. It's just as easy, for sure. And I'm able to get good size curls with this blade, or really fine ones if need be. The kind of stuff that usually lights really well off a fire steel. And I can make barrels, or I can make curls that spread out like this. The technique is going to be a little different just because it's a very curved, swept blade with an acute point. So as soon as you figure that out, a minute or two playing with it, if you've used many blades before, you're really not going to struggle to figure out how to use this in a firecraft way. In fact, I think it's really, really nice. I like using this for firecraft in general because of the kind of curls I can make. And that big sweep just kind of takes a little of the effort out of it, actually. It doesn't bite quite as deep as a Scandi would. With a Scandi blade, usually, let me grab one. With a big Scandi, if you have good technique, you can still do this fine. It just bites so much deeper. And like, this is a blade I have a lot of experience with. I have to be so delicate to make smaller barrels with this, or thinner shavings rather. It's just a skill set thing. I have to be really intentional. And if I'm going to go down to the super fine stuff, man, I can just barely touch this. In that way, I would say the Bear Force Knives has a decent advantage over this big guy for me personally. Just because this is a Scandi, it wants to dig in really deep, and this one allows me to skim the surface a little better and skin much easier. So versatility-wise, I don't know. There will be an argument in the comments section, but I kind of lean towards this guy. At my local range, I like to use this little cabin. You can shoot out of it with rimfire at least at 50 yards, and then there's a wood stove in here. It's just a good warm place to be on cold days. And so a lot of times when I'm leaving, I make sure that there's something that's easy to prep for the person coming after me so they can start a fire quickly, because sometimes it's just really cold and it takes a long time to heat up. So having a little bit of wood prepped is nice, and then a lot of times I'm the next person here because nobody likes the cold. So anyways, I batoned off some pieces of this poplar just using this knife, and I took a big split and just did the corners down, got a couple of these edges off. This knife has batoned quite a few times, actually a lot more than I should have, but it's pretty stout. I've never worried about it. It's not a Scandi where it's got such a thin edge that I would be worried about damage. I've never had any issues with this edge. It's a pretty strong edge overall, but I leave myself a few curls, or the next person a few curls, and just working with wood in general with this knife has been pretty pleasant. I haven't found it to be really any more difficult to push into wood, and part of that is the handle, which is what I want to talk about. This handle is fairly ergonomic and comfortable, and for a 3-inch knife, or actually, is it 3 inches? Might not even be all the way 3. I have to go back and check the specs here, but about a 3-inch blade, about a 3-inch handle, something like that. This is really, really comfortable in hand. Part of it is the swell right here. There is a swell. There's somewhat of a finger trail here, but it's not as much of a reduction as I've seen in a lot of other blades that are about this size, where there's such a little amount to hold on to that really I feel like I couldn't close my hand all the way. And I already have some hand problems. I'm not sure what's going on with my hand, but I can't close it all the way sometimes. So I need to have a little bit of a bigger handle, broadness and thickness, both. Length is actually the thing I can usually get away with, not having a super long handle. And this one, actually, if I could show you with my left hand here, I can get all 4 fingers on that handle pretty comfortably if I just choke up. And I'm not worried about slipping forward and not stabbing with this knife a lot, although you could, because it's got a very acute tip, very, very pointy. But I can get all 4 of my fingers on there and go to work. And then I can also go back a little bit if I do need to puncture something. I can get locked in really, really well And the finger choil and the finger grooves here, this kind of swell in the middle, is not so particular that it's not going to work for other people's kinds of hands. And that's probably due to the fact that all Bear Force knives I've ever had have really, really nicely contoured handles without hot spots, without sharp spots. I'm sure he makes some with more of aggressive treads, but I've never used any of those. This is just a really comfortable tread or a comfortable micarta. It's actually what he calls bear carta for the hand. It doesn't chew up my hand. It doesn't give me hot spots. And putting a lot of force into a small blade like this, I'm able to really articulate cuts and be very accurate and precise and get a lot of power out of this. The sweep probably helps as I sweep through the wood as well. It's not made to be just a woods knife. It's really kind of an EDC or maybe outdoors EDC type blade. And so I need to do some woodwork with it, a little bit of fire prep. A lot of times I'm breaking down boxes just like every other normal person. I'm cutting up zip ties, I'm skinning game. And so it just needs to be a versatile blade. And part of the versatility is the handle itself. If this was the same knife and it had flat handle scales that were half the thickness that it is now, I could still like it, but I just wouldn't see it the same way. I like having this with the thicker handle scales. It's very comfortable and it's still really easy to pocket carry for me in the front of the pocket. There's some double thick going against the grain. Obviously slips through really no trouble whatsoever. Like I said before, I've decided to put an ulti-clip on there. I don't think it's necessary. It's just the way I like to carry it in the front of my pocket. But it actually packs down really small. The sheath is hardly any bigger than the actual blade dimensions, which is nice to see. And I find that there's a lot of versatility, a lot of options with all those holes. It does have a drainage hole, and the fitment is superb with a thumb depress built in. So that's something you usually pay a little more for, is good quality kydex with lots of options. Usually knives just don't seem to come with that, but at this custom level they absolutely do. And I find it to be everything I need for either in the waistband carrying, outside the waistband on the belt actually carrying, or in the front of the pocket, or maybe just slipping it into a pack, which has happened too. I like this knife and it doesn't seem cumbersome in my pocket. I think it's actually pretty easy to EDC this blade. Surprisingly, with the thickness of that handle, some people would maybe not think it's quite so easy to do, but it's balanced out pretty well and it doesn't seem to lay funny in my pocket. It's pretty proportional. Now, obviously, I'm a fan of Bear Force knives. This is one of the custom simple knives. This is a multi-grind. A little bit thicker than some of the other models. And I reviewed the 1/16 thick model as well as this one, which is definitely a thicker stock thickness. Very comfortable, very functional. Really, really, really impressed with the functionality of the blade. It's kind of a minor secondary portion here, but it is thinner with a distal taper down to the tip. This blade has been phenomenal and I've used the heck out of it. Still looks pretty good. Then I've got the GT3, which I most recently reviewed prior to the Stumpy. This one has some awesome bear carta handles. I'm really happy with these. This is just unique. It's kind of a standout blade. I haven't had anything like this and it's been working really well for me. I actually use this in my shop pretty much every week. And then of course the Stumpy. And the Stumpy is just in between both of those in so many ways. It's got a thicker handle, it does have a shorter blade, and it's just kind of unique. It's not a typical blade design that I've had. Here's a little comparison for size and handle differences, as well as blade profile, quite a bit smaller overall. You can see cutting lengthwise, it's more similar to the GT3, and handle thickness and even broadness, it's more similar to the simple knife in some ways, but it's just unique. It's got some portions that don't look anything like either of the other blades, and that's why I like it. It is totally unique. It's not the same sweep. this portion and this portion have a little bit more in common, but this is totally unique. These have some things in common as far as the handle contours being a little bit more comfortable, easier to get on, grab onto. But these both have the Barracuda, which I'm a huge fan of. I love the aesthetic of this. And these are great too, but comfort-wise in hand when things are snowy or wet, I'm really a big fan of this Barracuda. It's been pretty excellent to work with. And really, I didn't have trouble EDCing the GT3. I didn't think this was overly long, it wasn't overly heavy, it wasn't difficult to EDC, and I do EDC fixed blades pretty often. The handle differences are substantial. The GT3 has a longer handle, so if that's a really big deal to you, and you just have to have longer handles, that might be something interesting. The Stumpy has a thicker, broader handle, not quite as long, but even with my XL size hands, here's the GT3. Okay, not bad. Here's the Stumpy, and I can actually get all four in there. It's just barely grabbing with the pinky if I scooch up. If I go back to this finger groove or choil, right here, ricasso, whatever that's called. If I go back, yeah, the pinky's gonna hang off a little bit, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable, and that doesn't give me a hot spot. And if you just need a fuller handle overall, I think the simple knife is still a great winner, and there's so many variations of this. If you're lucky, they'll be in stock right now on the website. Worth checking out and taking a look at. This one fills my hand in multiple directions and ways, and I find it to be the most comfortable for woodworking, but it's not as carryable as these options are. And I think overall, actually the most carryable blade for EDC for me is going to be this Stumpy. Concerning sheaths, I've put on a couple different clips because I like these other styles of clips. I usually like Ulti clips the best, but it does come with a strap that's very functional. I could still carry all these blades with this strap in different orientations. The sheaths themselves, I have no dog in this fight, but I'm going to tell you that I really like the design of this one. But all of them are winners. I've never had a sheath from BFK that was less than fantastic. I absolutely recommend his Kydex. You will not have to have these redone. Retention is excellent, they're quiet, and they also drain. So everything that I care about is really good. They do have some extra flair like the thumb depress, and even the edges seem to be taken care of really, really well. They have a heart inside their body, just like lots of animals do.
I didn't know that's like just humans do.
Nope. Most animals that have blood have also a heart.
Like, we do. I know we do.
Yep.
And you do, I know. But cameras don't.
What don't?
Cameras.
Cameras don't?
Yeah.
They don't have hearts? No.
You know what? Those
I'm going to tell you, this is the part of the process where if you're going to try to get around the face, it's really nice to have a small, pointy, easy to wield blade. And this one has all the features that I need to get this really small, kind of precise work done around his ears. Tails are so hard to work with. Squirrels, I've pulled a couple successfully, but they are just tricky. Usually grab a stick or a pliers or something and pull down on this thing, but yeah, they're tricky. Looks like I got most of it, not all of it this time. I got real close. Yeah, it's just that last little bit. That's pretty darn fine though for how cold it is right now. I didn't know how much I would get out of that one. I always find this bit very taxing right here. Again, as a newbie, it's a lot of work. But the knife is making it easier than with a lot of other blades I've used because I can get so close up on here get a lot of control and not over penetrate or press in and not cut myself either. One thing I always try to do is before I even get to fleshing, if I see big chunks of meat, I just leave them out there for the birds and pull them off. Now, same thing with the glands. The glands in the armpit and all that, the critters will feast on those, and I don't want to have to deal with them later. Real easy. Man, that's excellent. Get through the ribs. Oh yeah. Right through the ribs, no trouble. Just sliced right through them. And usually I got the head cut off by now, actually. That was just straight through the bone even. Didn't take my time too much with that guy. Alright, so I'm punching holes in some leather that I made. Well, it's a fur. Got a hide here. And I'm making a really simple little pouch. And I was trying to figure out what to do with this one, because this one got stretched out just a little bit funny. It's nice and pliable. It is soft. The fur stayed on, which is good. But I need to cut a straight line here, a couple other straight lines, just to make this into a functional pouch that I have a couple ideas for. So I'm going to use the Stumpy to get that done. So it won't make a lot of sense to you why I'm cutting, probably where I'm cutting. You'll see the end result and it might make more sense. But okay, right there. Cut through all the hair pretty well. So the knife allowed me to make some controlled and comfortable straight cuts on this leather and the fur hide, cut through that really, really well. And it's a softer kind of leather, and so you do need to have a good sharp knife either way to get through the fur and the leather combination. It's not overly thick when it's just a squirrel, but it's allowing me to make this little pouch so far. I'm not sure what I'm going to use it for, but just kind of testing it out and a chance to use the blade. And I really like the angle and the sweep of that belly, because it gives me a lot of cutting surface that I can actually reach. If you can see this here, quite a bit of that is actually accessible to me, even with the finger choil on a flat surface. Okay, so here's a pouch that I'm working on for my silky saw to go into. Just kind of something extra. A little bit bushcrafty. And I have a few more cuts to make on this, but overall, it did a good job of helping me get this done and cutting things neatly with good lines, and I like that. I had a bunch of the shavings here, cut through those pretty evenly, and really nice clean cuts overall. I think that belly was something that I was even happier with after using it a little more. Here's the sheath. If I haven't talked about the sheath yet, really quickly. The sheath, I put an ulti clip on there. That's just because that's my preference. I like the ulti clip. This happens to be the smaller model. It's really, really tight on bigger jeans, but on looser slacks and stuff for EDC, kind of carry, it fits well. So I like to go with this, but it comes with a loop and it's totally functional the way it comes. And you wouldn't have to have the loop on there. You could just drop it in a pocket or a pack. This is a very small sheath with excellent retention, very easy to depress and get at it, but it's locked in there. There's no rattle. Okay, I lied. No, I totally lied. For the sake of transparency, there's a minimal amount of rattle this way, just a little bit this way. My opinion is that's because I did that. I think I loosened this up just a little bit. I don't believe the sheath came with any rattle whatsoever. I think I screwed with it. I just wanted to loosen up a tiny bit on one edge, not because it couldn't go in and out, just because I wanted it to be in and out smoother and easier with less resistance. So it came better than this. I'm sorry, Garrett, that I loosened it up a little bit. That was just a preference thing. I do that on a lot of sheaths. Just if I wanted a little tighter, a little more secure on some sheaths, I usually do that. It's probably the first BFK sheath I've made any modification to, and it's mostly the way that I use this knife and the pocket it sits in. gives a little extra squeeze on the sheath. And so it was already good and secure, but with the extra squeeze, it just made it tight. So I loosened it up a tiny bit, but it's still excellent. And the way that it came, it probably would have broken in just fine. You've got some really well done rivets here, or whatever you want to call them. And these are all flanged properly. I can see they're evenly. If you know anything about kydex, you can kind of look at how these roll out. And if you ever have an extra flat portion or it's not all the way curled, that means they just didn't do their due diligence in making the sheath. This is perfect. Every single one of them is perfect. The drainage hole is right where it should be. That's actually really wise. And then you have on the bottom another drainage hole there. So yeah, really good. Really good sheath. I'll put that aside. Getting back to the belly, that's what I was actually talking about. I think the belly portion here allows me to get a lot of contact before I run into this little piece right here, the finger stopper, finger choil, whatever. So it gives you a lot of surface area there. And if you're not cutting directly against a flat surface, it gives you even more to work with. I actually think this grip right here, yeah, I can get most of that blade, even though I've got 3 fingers on instead of 4 with this grip. I can get most of that blade functionally on whatever I'm working on, whether it be cutting up food or working with wood, cutting zip ties. It doesn't matter what it is. I can get most of the blade to be pretty functional there and get a lot of the sweep in this portion. And if I go up to a 4-finger hold, I'm only reducing it by a little bit where my thumb is. If I go out for a hike and I'm clearing trails, I might bring a hatchet, or if I'm doing a little bit of spoon craft, like I started working on this spoon with the BFK and this Beavercraft hatchet. And I like this. It's a decent spoon hatchet. I think I'm gonna work on the edge a little bit for this hatchet, but it's pretty close. I think it's really good in general. And the 2 of these, I can still do some spoon craft. This isn't an amazing spoon. I do actually take some time and make some pretty decent spoons. This is not a representation of that. I'll see if I can find one sometime. So here's an example of one that, even this is a little bit more basic than some that I do. I like to do coal roasting and do some designs, Swedish textures and patterns. That's all fun stuff to do. And a little knife is actually really nice, especially something that has that acute tip. I can do all these very small details in spoons. And if I'm going to do coal roasting, this is a knife I could actually use. This looks like the knives I use for that. But this is good, and this spoon sucks, but I was just messing around, kind of trying it. This piece of hardwood, this is black walnut, and it's been really difficult to work with this whole piece. So much of it was splitting. But that aside, a lot of times I like to go out and use a hatchet and a small knife and just make something to come back with, something to keep working on. And so this has done just fine for those kind of tasks. I can go out with this, and this does just about everything. It'll do the food. It'll do a little bit of bushcraft. It's not my major bushcraft knife. I have BFKs that I would prefer over this for that particular task. But this doesn't hold me back too much. It's got some really good contours and attributes that make it pretty easy to use. It's just not a Scandi, would be the only thing. And I want to actually compare. I'm going to push this stuff aside. And I want to compare a little bit against some other blades just to give you an idea of what these proportions look like. And a lot of you have maybe used a Mora Eldris. So I just want to show you some proportionality differences here. I'm going to come in a little closer. There's some proportionality differences. The Mora Eldris is not a bad blade. It's a pretty decent blade. It isn't full tang. It's definitely not custom. The handle is not, the Bayer Carda or my Carda. It's kind of a gummy texture with some plastic. And the blade is going to be much thinner. I don't have as much reach. I don't have as much actual cutting surface overall, even with that sweep of the Eldris. It doesn't reach quite as far, and I can't get into wood quite as much. It's a good knife, and I like it. I kind of think this is a beater compared to something like this, though. Just my opinion. This, I would use it up, burn it up, and throw it away. This blade, I would have a hard time ever throwing something like this away because I really like it. Just pride of ownership is going to be way higher on a knife like this that just has so much more going into the production of the blade. So it's just a pride of ownership issue, I'm sure. But functionally, they can do EDC tasks. Both of them can. But I like the sheath better by quite a bit on the BFK than I do on the Eldris. The Eldris is fine if I'm going on a canoeing trip or a backpacking trip. It's not the worst. I've got a little fire steel holder on there, but it's not that hard for me to put one on this, and this has a lower profile by quite a bit. And I like the carry method a lot more. I suppose I could try to find a way to do that with the Eldris, but why do it when I have the BFK? So sheath-wise, even though the Mora Eldris is neat and it's got some cool things, it does have a fairly comfortable handle overall, and it's a little bit longer of a handle, just a touch longer. But it has a shorter blade, and it sacrifices a little more than I would like to compared to the BFK for my purposes. Also, when it comes to skinning, this isn't bad, but this Nitro V is clearly superior. There's not even a question in my mind that this is a superior steel compared to the Eldris. I'll put that aside. Still good blade. Another knife that I really, really like, and these would be much more competitive with each other because I so fondly think of these two blades. So this is an LT Wright Bush Baby, happens to be in A2 as it's marked there. A2 is not a bad steel. It's a pretty decent steel. I did have to reprofile this one. My opinion was that the blade needed a convexing, again, for the way that I use it. It was just a tad thick behind the edge when I got it from the factory, in my opinion. So to make it a little bit more versatile and friendly for the things I do, I did touch it up a lot. I had to work it on the stone for a while. But it's a good knife. It has a good handle. Aesthetically, it's very pleasing. And again, it's from LT. I like LT stuff a lot. Here's what the contour and dimensional differences are. It's a longer handle, so it's a little bit harder to put this one away. It's a little harder to stow this away. It does have technically 3 places that are kind of helping hold this together. The BFK has 2. It's got 2 large brass pins, and there's no barrel in the lanyard hole. And in the LT, there is a lanyard barrel, which somewhat can help hold things together when it's glued and epoxied in there. And you have some different parts here. You have brass with a steel insert in the middle. You do have liners on this, but this has green, red, green on the Barracarda. So just a couple differences I noticed about them. This is the superior steel for me in the things that I'm doing. I like this a little better. And I have to mention that I think the handle on this, even though it's not as long, it's more filling in the hand. You can see how narrow the LT is going to be compared to the BFK. And I still use this knife all the time. I like it. I'm not ragging on it. I do like it. I'm just saying the comparison between the two. This is thinner. It's not as broad. And the BFK is going to be superior in that way. I think the actual feel of the material, there's a little bit more texture in the BFK than there is in the LT. And some people want a smoother handle all the way around. Some people are concerned about a smooth handle around, broomstick handle like this rolling in the hand. They might be concerned about the finger choil and the reduction there, that there's not as much to hold on to, and it might give you a hot spot in this first finger position. I understand all that. I like both of them. I would not complain about these or say that these are very much so lacking designs in any way. I love them both. But I'm going to say that the BFK probably has a superior value in my mind if you're looking for something that fills the hand and is a little bit more EDC friendly, rather. And just for fun, I'll bring in one more here. This is a blade I made years ago, and it's got birch stack handle with cherry for the, I can't remember what you call the front and the back end. And then I just I made the tang hot and I pressed it in, and I might have used some epoxy. Actually, I don't think I did on this one. I think I just pressed this in using some pine resin inside of this when this was hot, and it coagulated and then got solid and held this in. So this one's fairly natural. It's just pine resin holding it in together. It's all rusted up. I made this from a Mill Bastard file. This file was really old. I couldn't find a lot of information on it. It's quite hard. It was fun, just a little knife project. Chipped out the tip almost right away doing a bow drill. But thickness is going to be similar. Handle is really good. This is probably the best handle that I've made on a small knife. It's actually very comfortable, and it stayed together well even though I use this knife kind of hard from time to time. Just a fun little project knife. And compared to the guys on the table, there's a little bit of that. Obviously this is pretty broad, doesn't fit many sheaths, so I had to custom make a sheath for this. And it's not totally practical. I'm not going to EDC this thing. quite frankly, I probably am not going to EDC the LT very often either, just because it is a little bit longer and it's so much easier to carry, whoops, so much easier to carry the BFK in my pocket or the front of the pocket because it's just about an inch shorter overall. Then you look at the sheath options. Let's move those in. The sheath options one more time. So the sheath on the LT is leather. It's kind of hard to get Kydex for LT sheaths unless you send it in and have it made. It's an extra cost you're going to have to consider. And by the time you do that, you're going to be at the price of one of these guys. So that's just something to consider. The Mora is not terribly hard to carry, but it's not going to go in and out very easily without some sort of front of the pocket carry clip. And then the sheath is just fat. Just kind of bulgy, so it'd be hard to carry in the front of the pocket comfortably. On the side of my belt, it's easy and it's small. Still like the knife, just think this is easier to carry. One of the things that determines which knife I take with me would be not so much just the dimensions, but actually what am I doing that day. And you can see the design of the knife and the tips are going to be different. This is fine for skinning. The LT is fine for skinning. This isn't bad at all. And I like the steel. It's easy to touch up. I've done so much with the Bush Baby. But after using this most recently, I'm going to say this is one of the best little skinners that I've used. It's very, very sharp and pointy. And as long as I'm careful with that sharp, pointy bit, I can really get in there and slide through critters, which is a big deal. I can do detailed work. I can still use this portion of the blade if I need something thicker and broader and I need some shearing power. So it kind of provides me with a lot of options. Not to mention that the handle does not fatigue my hand. The LT, it's got a nice center point. I love that. It's a good bushcraft thing. This is probably a little more bushcrafty than the BFK is. And when I feel like I'm going to be doing a lot of notching or carving and I don't want to bring a full-size blade, yeah, this might be something that I would take instead. But EDC, the thing that I'm going to carry the most, well, it's probably going to be something like this.